Good morning and welcome to the City of Los Angeles Family Assistance Center seminar. My name is Nadan Rambo, and I want to thank you all for being here today. In this seminar, we're going to discuss Family Assistance Center plan and how it's being developed. We have a wide variety of guests who will share their knowledge and experience on a subject. This seminar aims to further the conversation and allow us to work together as a collective force committed to supporting families during their most challenging moments. Disasters, whether natural or man-made, can strike swiftly and unexpectedly, devastating families and entire communities. During those moments of uncertainty, a family assistance center can offer solace, guidance, and information to those in need. Managing such centers is a multifaceted challenge that demands strategic coordination, empathy, and a deep understanding of those families' practical and emotional needs. Through the seminar, we have presentations from stakeholders at the city, county, and federal levels, as well as LAWA, nonprofits like the Red Cross and the Chinatown Service Center of Los Angeles. We're going to discuss real-world examples, case studies to build a better picture of these operations. Once again, I extend a warm welcome to each one of you, and I'm confident that by the end of the seminar, we'll emerge better prepared and more informed. Now, I'd like to introduce Carol Parks, the General Manager of the Emergency Management Department of Los Angeles.
Thank you and good morning, Nadan. Sound check, can everyone hear me okay?
We can hear you good.
All right. Thank you. Well, I really do want to just take a moment to applaud all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this training, this seminar, as it relates to family assistance centers. As we all know, when things happen, unexpectedly, it's very important that we are there as city family, county, other non-governmental organizations to be there in the time of need. And it's at these training opportunities where we can learn about our capacity, any gaps, any lessons learned from recent experiences, and how we can just work together more during blue sky days to ensure that when something does happen, we are there for the families, the survivors, and those who just witnessed something very unfortunate. So I really do encourage you to be as participative as possible, ask the hard questions, and let's challenge each other to find better solutions so that we can be the best support agents when something happens. I want to also acknowledge the great partnerships that we have with the F.B.I. Victim Services Program, the Mayor's Crisis Response Team, our LA County Office of Emergency Management, LA World Airports, the American Red Cross, and the Chinatown Service Center in Los Angeles. With your incredible partnerships, we as a city family are better able to plan, respond, and recover. So we look forward to those of you who will be presenting from these various organizations. And I want to also thank the EMD staff, Nidan, and others who have worked to put this seminar together today. Thank you again, and please enjoy this training session. Back to you, Nidan.
Thanks, Carol. All right, well, we're going to get started. For this seminar, we have the chat open. It will remain open throughout the duration of the seminar. If you have any questions, you can place them in the chat. We're going to get to them. Some questions we'll answer directly within the presentation or at the end, but a lot of them we're going to save toward the end. There will be a longer question-answer session right at the end. So with that being said, we have a lot of guest speakers. I want to jump directly into our first guest today. We have John Brown from the Emergency Management Department.
All right. Thank you, Nadan, and good morning, everyone. I appreciate you taking your time this morning to jump on and hear all the great information these partners have to share about Family Assistance Centers. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of context of kind of where we are in the city of Los Angeles. Last year, EMD had a lot of turnover through COVID, and just like all of your departments, I'm sure, we were really trying to restaff and get our arms wrapped around kind of where we are as a department in terms of planning. So myself and 4 other new EMCs came into the planning division and took a real hard look at the entire suite of emergency plans that we have in the city of Los Angeles. And kind of one of the things that stuck out at us the most was the lack of a city-specific family assistance center plan. Traditionally, over the last kind of 10 years or so, we've been relying on the county's plan, which is a great plan, and in fact is what we are basing a lot of the work that we're doing off of. But there was a clear need that we needed to develop a plan and really outline the roles and responsibilities of the city departments, but also our city stakeholders, our external stakeholders, and their roles and responsibilities should we need a family assistance center. And thankfully, the last time the city opened a family assistance center, for a city-specific incident was quite a while ago in 2008 for the Chatsworth train incident up in the valley. So, but I think we can all agree that in the world that we live in now, that unfortunately, it's probably only a matter of time before another family assistance center is needed. So we are now undertaking the project of developing this family assistance center plan, and we dove into the archives of the EMD share drive and hard copy file folders and found a good starting point for this plan. We found a standard operating procedure to be able to open a family assistance center. And we also found a plan that was developed, I would say about 50%, but is a very good starting point for us. So we are taking those documents and trying to really develop a plan that is more 80%, I would say, baked, and then bringing it to the stakeholders. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I'll just kind of dive into a broad overview of the plan structure and what it'll incorporate for this time. So what is a family assistance center? Family assistance center is defined as a secure meeting place in the aftermath of a major incident or disaster for families, friends, and individuals seeking assistance and information about their loved ones. So for those of you that are familiar with the local assistance center concept after, say, a wildfire or a flood, where victims of that disaster go to a one-stop shop for all the resources that are applicable to them, this is very similar in that realm, but obviously a little bit more emotional intelligence and sensitive situation with the fact that there are casualties or fatalities involved with an incident. So next slide, Naden. So really, again, these are draft objectives, and they will be either added or amended as we kind of begin the stakeholder meetings. But I wanted to give kind of a starting point for where we are. So the objective of our City of LA Family Assistance Center plan is really to provide that structure for management of both smaller level facts and large facts. If it was, say, a large transportation incident or a worst case scenario, a large catastrophic earthquake, something like that. We want to maintain a consistent response and management approach and establish a minimum standard of service. So what are those actual services that were provided at the Family Assistance Center? Who will provide them, and what are the timing of those those services and resources will be provided? Of course, I just mentioned we want to clearly define, can we go back real quick, Naden? Clearly define the stakeholder responsibilities, both city and external, align the city's of LA's response with other FACT partners, such as airline and rail transportation providers, which have their own legislation. I think you'll hear a little bit more about from them in the future. And then meet the needs of the victims and their loved ones in a highly emotional and complex environment. So go ahead, Naden. Now, this is just kind of I know it's a busy slide, but I wanted to give a brief overview of how the plan will be organized. Of course, we have the standard, the scope, responsibilities, revisions, and things, but these are some of the components that I think that are important. And I wanted to specifically call out the time between a physical family assistance center opening up and the time that the incident occurs. There is a time period in there where we'll have to come up with a strategy to be able to, meet those folks' needs and answer any questions in that immediate aftermath of an incident. So you'll see there at the 311 call center gathering and giving information. We'll be working with those partners as well as our mayor's crisis response team to kind of understand what we can provide and be able to to get to folks in that short time period before the physical FAC opens. So next slide, Dan. A little bit more. Actually, you can just go to the next slide, Dan. I think this next graphic will make a little bit more sense. So there's a few different phases, and I don't know if it's showing up there. Dan, can you go back one more slide? Sorry, I guess it's not coming in, but essentially there's different phases of the FAC activation process, and it starts with that activation and determining by the incident commander or the EOC directors that a family assistance center is needed, right? So that will begin the activation process and allowing those stakeholders to be contacted, which will move us into the deployment process and really identifying which resources and agencies need to be deployed to that FAC, what the location will be, and mobilize. The next step would be mobilizing those resources in terms of the logistics, the folks that need to be there, the public information piece, and all of that. We would then move into the operations of the FAC and ultimately the demobilization of the FAC. And so similar to any kind of response structure that we've seen, it's going to follow a similar ICS structure with a FAC director basically acting as the incident commander with the same kind of ICX section that we see in response, but those branches underneath those sections will be quite different from the normal response, branch directors or ICS positions that we see. You can see here that there are a number of different kind of specialty groups as it applies to the Family Assistance Center versus the response organization. So next slide, Dan. The command staff, these look very familiar to the response folks. The same kind of overall command staff that we'll see in any operation. So Dan, you can go ahead and move forward. The operations section, here's some key differences that we would like to point out in terms of the FAC versus response. While you do have the operations section chief or coordinator, you have these reception branch who will be really doing the intake, which is a crucial part of a family assistance center, and understanding the emotional needs of folks, being able to welcome folks in that the emotionally intelligent manner that's needed, getting them to the registration to get the information, intake them, and then passing them to a family host group will essentially be an escort through the Family Assistance Center, so they have a consistent point of contact and a resource that's reliable to them throughout the entire process. So next slide. Logistics, obviously, just like any kind of field operation, it'll take some significant logistical efforts. So we have underneath the logistics section chief, we'll have a communications branch who will be responsible for setting up the internal communications along with that IT group and the site communications group, ensuring that we have consistent communication in the aftermath of a disaster, with our county, state, federal partners, as well as our external stakeholders. Planning, as with any operation, these are going to look very familiar. We want to make sure that we're documenting, we're putting out situation reports, of course, that, keeping in mind what information is confidential and what we can provide both internally in a confidential for official use only manner, but also to the public at large and, to city leadership. So go ahead. Some of the things that we're using as kind of the framework for our plan are, of course, like I mentioned, the LA County Operational Area FAC Plan, which is basically the foundation for what we are creating, and just putting in some city specifics as well. We've obviously looked at numerous after-action reports from incidents across the nation. We are relying on the F.B.I.'s Mass Fatality Incident Family Assistance Operations Handbook, and the City of LA's EOP. Our functional annex is ultimately what these documents are going to result in. So, yeah, go ahead. So like I said, the formatting got a little bit messed up here, but our next steps are to basically finish this plan with what we have available to us at the moment. And basically, like I said, we want an 80% draft that we can take then to a committee of stakeholders and be able to have them then review what we have and edit it versus starting from scratch. This is a huge time commitment for a lot of these folks. And so we want to be able to have something on paper and be able to revise it in real time together versus trying to come up with strategies and then, have additional meetings to review after that. And ultimately, once we have that Family Assistance Center draft from the city and external stakeholders, we'll try to get some public input on it and see, how the public feels about it. And if we're going to be able to meet the needs and have them identify any other considerations that the city and stakeholders should be taking into account. And then lastly, once this is completed, we will take this and move it up to the Emergency Operations Working Group and Board for review and approval, and we will include this in the suite of plans. As far as timeline goes, we anticipate this to be completed in the first half of next year. To be completely honest, the staff members that were carrying this project forward moved on to different positions, and we're in the middle of hiring new staff, and that new staff will be assigned this project. And like I said, hopefully in the first quarter to first half of calendar year, we'll have an approved Family Assistance Center plan for the city of Los Angeles. So that is my overview for the city's FACT plan, and I will turn it back over to Dan.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate that. We are going to jump into our next panelist now. I did see some comments. I just want to let everyone know there is a Q&A button. So there's not a standard chat, but there is a question and answer button that anybody can click. If you have any questions or thoughts, please click that and put your questions in there. All right, now it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our next guest. We have Crystal Mills with the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you great.
Great, awesome. Well, thank you so much for inviting us to participate in today's presentation seminar. And today I'm here with my colleague, Claire Balanet. We both work for the FBI. We're victim specialists. I sit in the Los Angeles field office in Westwood, covering LA County, and my counterpart covers Orange County, San Bernardino County, and Riverside County. And today we are here to talk a little bit about the San Bernardino shooting, but more specifically on setting up a family assistance center, talk a little bit about that, and also lessons learned and answer any questions that you might have. So it's going to be a quick presentation, but we hope that we all can kind of learn from our experience in setting up an FAC. And I think for this section, Claire's going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the incident and then how we responded within the first 24 hours.
Good morning. Hopefully you can see me. So I just wanted to provide a little backdrop as far as the San Bernardino shooting case. If you all can recall, it happened on the morning of December 2nd, 2015, and 22 people were injured and 14 people were killed when Syed Rizwan Farouk and his wife Tashfeen Malik went on a mass shooting spree during a county employee training at the Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino. Because we were the lead investigative agency, our victim assistance program was also the lead in making sure that we provided the victim services following the aftermath of it happens to be the largest terrorism case in our division's history. Because it happened in my area of responsibility, I was the one to respond to the Family Reunification Center, which was held at the Rudy Hernandez Community Center, if you all recall. And that's where families were either reunited with victims or were working with the coroner's office to provide information about their missing loved one. It was a few hours there, and then I proceeded on to the coroner's office, where I sat down with the supervising deputy coroner investigator and the captain of the coroner's division. And it was there that I actually met them for the first time. I did a brief overview about our program, talked about our requirements, and what our mandates were and what victims were entitled to, since, again, it was considered an FBI investigation. Later on, early morning, the coroner's office had actually opened the first FAC for this particular case, and they opened it at a nearby hotel. It didn't last as long, but if I remember correctly, it might have been a few days before. It was a few days it was opened, and then there was a little bit of a gap, and then we opened up our Family Assistance Center. But meanwhile, I was already speaking with my colleagues, Crystal, and at the time we also had Debbie Deem, who has since now retired. But we were basically conducting an action plan of what we were going to be doing the following day. And Crystal, you want to talk about what we did the following day?
Yeah, so 6 a.m. the following day, Claire and I met up with Claire. I think it was maybe 6 a.m., 7 a.m., and we met up at the San Bernardino County Coroner's Office and strategized on how we were going to deal with the death notification. We had a list of deceased victims, so we decided to split the list. I would do 8 of the death notifications. Claire would do 6, and we would partner obviously with the deputy coroner, who would take the lead essentially in using the verbiage of, we are sorry to inform you, and do the actual death notification. We would also partner up with an advocate from the DA Bureau of Victim Services. So we would go as a team of 3, split into 2 groups, and go door to door to do the actual death notification that following day, the 3rd of December. And at the same time, while doing the death notification, myself and the other advocate from the DA's office would offer services and do sort of a preliminary needs assessment, their situation, needs that they might have. Obviously, it's a moment of crisis, so families can't really think about their needs. They can't really think about therapy. So being very mindful of that and gathering as much information about the next of kin and any kind of family dynamics that we can pick up on, as sometimes that comes up after a death notification or a crisis of this sort. So by the end of the day, that second day, we completed the 14 death notifications. At the same time, while Claire and I are doing that, our colleague Debbie Deem was in the background thinking already about setting up the Family Assistance Center. Our rapid deployment team was deployed, and Claire's going to talk a little bit about that. But we all kind of had very specific, clear goals and roles. Claire and I would do the death notification, immediately work with the next of kin families of the deceased victims, while Debbie Deem worked on the plan, setting up the family assistance plan, and start calling the right people and creating coordination with those agencies that would work with us.
So as far as Crystal mentioned, there is a victim assistance rapid deployment team. It's gone through a variation of names, and it's now called VSRT, Victim Services Response Team. But at that time, it was called Victim Assistance Rapid Deployment Team, and it was consisted of F.B.I. employees only, and it was either a victim specialist like myself across the country and agents. And it's now evolved once more to add additional staff like analysts. And while Crystal and I were really more dealing with the next of kin, obviously there were many more folks that were in hospitals that needed additional assistance as well. And that's the reason for this rapid deployment team, is they provide us the support that we needed. And in this case, providing the support to those who were hospitalized. They also have a crisis canine unit, and they were the first to be deployed. Our actual incident was the first time that they were deployed. Their names are Gio and Wally, and they're actually about to retire. Again, they went out with their handlers to the hospitals, and they also, when there was a downtime, they were also at the FAC, including all the personnel with the deployment team. But they arrived on the 3rd, which is the following day, and they stayed for additional 13 days. Again, providing a lot of the support that Crystal and I couldn't do because we were so engrossed with making sure that we were taking care of the next of kin. And then once they left, then the bulk of the 22 folks that were injured were then assigned to me, just again because this case happened in my area of responsibility. And then Crystal, do you want to talk a little bit more about Debbie Deem and what she did and who she spoke with and the folks at the FAC?
Yeah, she took on a big role. She was amazing. First of all, so Debbie began working on what we really was the first ever FBI sponsored FAC. And she worked really closely with the San Bernardino County Office of Emergency Services and the DA Office, the Bureau of Victim Services in San Bernardino County, to brainstorm exactly which agencies would bring benefit to the victims. Obviously, there were so many agencies that wanted to participate and be at the FAC. Debbie really had to work with those partners to narrow down the list and be very mindful and strategic about having the appropriate agencies, organizations present. So this is a flyer I found. I mean, this was 8 years ago. So as I was preparing for this training or this presentation, Claire and I had to really dig into old notes and emails and communications we had. And so I found this old flyer from that was created for the FAC to disseminate to the victims. And as you can see here, some of the partners that helped and the location, the times. This was set up at the National Orange Show Event Center, the FAC that we created. You see the date there and the times and all of the agencies that participated. So this was the agencies that were there were the American Red Cross. They helped a lot, and Claire's going to talk a little bit about some of the services that they provided. We had the DA Bureau of Victim Services, obviously, to help apply for victim compensation. And the strategy was that the FAC would help in different ways. Not only the typical victim services, but we would also be providing returning personal effects back, which we had already returned the vehicles back to the families, the next of kin. Obviously, the employees that were killed left their vehicles there, so we had to return that back to the next of kin. That was done slightly earlier on. The other thing I want to point is for the Family Assistance Center, I think it's important to talk about timeline. Death notifications were done fairly quickly, but the Family Assistance Center was scheduled and opened up on day 7 after the incident because it was meant to be a very well thought out place where victims can come. And in addition to providing services and returning the personal effects back, we also wanted to provide a briefing for the families. And that was something else that was done. So some of the agencies listed here, we had the DMV, we had Public Social Services, we had the Social Security Administration there. Debbie did such a fabulous job in bringing folks and agencies that were really helpful in meeting the needs of the victims. And also, I just want to say that the DA Bureau of Victim Services was amazing during the entire process, also working with us to provide the services. They provided the funding for the food that was going to be offered to the victims the days that the FAC was set up. And then also the Red Cross offered canteen food for the employees that were there. The agencies that were there setting up at the FAC. So that was extremely helpful. And we also had another agency help provide free daycare for the families. Was there anything else, Claire, that you wanted to add for this section?
No, the VOAD, the Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, was pretty much a huge agency that we reached out to, and they're the ones that helped to coordinate the childcare, which is definitely needed in the situations involving the FAC and when you have large amount of families. And childcare is one thing that we definitely wanted to make sure that was provided for them.
Yeah.
And as far as the being mindful too, at that time, a few years before this, San Bernardino County had also filed for bankruptcy. And that's part of the large reason why we also funded this FAC, because the costs were going to be tremendous. We needed a large space because we knew that we needed a place to do these briefings, and we needed to have a secured spot. And so obviously we had our agents provided security along with the San Bernardino County sheriffs, and then people were very interested in what was going on. We had helicopters flying around trying to get as much as from the media. And thankfully we had a public information officer that was responsible for trying to shoo them away, essentially. And that was really important for these families. So, when you're putting together an FAC, security is a priority, and making sure their privacy is also respected. And that's what we try to do with setting up this FAC at the Orange Center.
Yeah, and we're going to continue on the FAC setup and logistics and stuff like that. But yeah, that's huge. Security, media is always trying to get in. We've had this experience in other cases, so we're very mindful of that when setting up the entrance, where the entrance would be to come into the FAC. So just a quick pause of reflection, I think really, really important to know. And obviously you guys know this, and but for us also was, know your contacts, have their cell phones, not landlines, not desk lines, and clear roles internally within your agency, who does what, and then sticking to that role. I would say, just reflecting back to this event, I'd say, I was new on the job. I've been with the Bureau 9 years now, but at the time had just been there for a year. And so, it was obviously, it's chaotic, it's stressful, you're trying to do your best. There's so many things going on. But I can say that, I feel like we did such a great job. I feel really good about the way that we work together as a team. So, it just kind of brings back memories to this incident as I'm presenting and I'm talking. I was preparing for this event. The other thing that I think is also very important is having relationship with the coroner's office in your respective area of responsibility. And if you don't have the, immediately making contact with them and getting to know them, being mindful of cultural considerations, language needs, and then also family dynamics is something we've seen. The cultural considerations and the language, we've learned from other instances that was something, and then family dynamics, we definitely learned it in this case. And so sometimes you have families that parents and the next of kin that are divorced, maybe they don't get along, they don't like each other. And so there's a little bit of that, just being mindful of that. And again, the FAC that we set up, like I said, it was day 7 that it was open, and day one of the FAC was to do a briefing for the families. And not all agencies do this, not all FACs do this, or at least it's not the purpose of it. Each agency operates slightly different, but for us, because we are a law enforcement investigative agency, we thought it would be helpful for the families. That's what they wanted, listening to their needs, to provide a briefing. And so we had executive management, our ADIC, along with partner law enforcement agencies, do a briefing day 1. I think that was December 9th, if I'm not mistaken. And that was 2 separate briefings. The first briefing was specifically for next of kin of the deceased victims' families, a smaller group of people, very private, so that they can hear what's going on with the investigation. That was one aspect. And then the second part of that briefing was open to people that were injured or that were present but not injured. Also, we were very mindful of who was coming in for this briefing because it's a sensitive topic. It's an ongoing investigation. And then day 2 and 3 of the FAC was specifically for the things that you see here on this flyer. It was for the services. Also, and Claire will talk a little bit more about, we also offered a site visit to the victims, the next of kin who lost their loved ones. So if you want to talk about
what's important as far as these briefings, we also informed people that they could not bring their attorneys and they could not record or audio record or videotape anything that was going on, again, because there were very sensitive information that was being provided to the families before it reached the media. As far as these site visits, again, very important, and we wanted to respect their privacy and also wanted to make them, kind of provide the chance for them to be able to be as close as possible to where their loved ones were killed. And so at the FAC, Debbie Deem actually was able to get charter buses And from the FAC to the location of where the shooting occurred, we transported the next of kin and gave them each of them a chance to, whether it be set flowers, but time to reflect. But we gave them that opportunity. Later on, we also gave them a chance to come back to the site where it was obviously cleaned up, and it was several months later. And that point, they got a chance to actually go inside and see exactly where their loved ones were killed. A very emotional and very, very impactful time at an opportunity that was given to them, which they really appreciated. But those, again, are extras. Obviously, it may not be something that can be done for every situation, but it appears that for every case involving us and other various mass casualty incidents, we do try to do a site visit for the families.
Yeah, and also going back to the FAC, the process of returning back personal effects that are not considered necessarily evidence items, they're just personal effects that freely can be returned back. We helped to get those cleaned and then returned back, and we try to do that at the FAC. Those that weren't cleaned in time, we were provided to the victims afterwards in person. So we were very sensitive. When you return a personal effect that has blood or any kind of biohazard on it, we have to clean them before we return them. So that's a process in itself. And then also the emotional moment when you're returning the item back to the surviving spouse or mother or father. That was also something that we wanted to be sensitive and have a moment where we're returning back in a respectful way back to the family members. And the FAC helped us in doing that with a lot of the items. Either they weren't damaged or they were able to get cleaned in time. So that was something else that we did at the FAC. And as you see here, it was open 2 days, and it was open from 12 to 8. We had 2 big rooms. We also had rooms set up for counseling and therapy, free daycare, like I said, and then canteen for the workers there, that the agencies that were there assisting. And there was a lot of other things that were going on in the background. Of course, as we're offering the family assistance centers, we were still working, going to the hospitals for those that were injured, meeting with the victims, in their home. So the other thing about the FAC, the way it was structured, is that there was one entrance only. We had worked with Debbie Deem had worked with the facilities security to ensure that the place was safe. We also had, I want to say, 1 or 2 agents there, and then we had a victim specialist, FBI victim specialist at the entrance, who was responsible for signing in anyone that came in, some identifying information, and then we would have an FBI victim specialist walk them around, first sit with them for a minute, do like a quick assessment. How are you doing? Kind of like what brings you in today, sort of thing. What are the services that you're interested in? A very quick assessment of needs, and then telling them who all is there, which agencies, and helping them navigate through all the different booths, essentially the tables that were set up, and explaining and walking them through the process so they're not alone if they feel very overwhelmed. But obviously, if they felt comfortable doing it on their own, they could do so. And there was food and water for the victims. There was restrooms. So we were thinking of all the different things that we had to have in mind in place. So in terms of the logistics, yeah, 1 entrance. We had, as Claire mentioned, someone from our media department that can address any media issues. That was a big thing in this case. Next of kin, we're getting calls from Dr. Phil and all these different TV shows, local media that were stationed outside of their homes, essentially being harassed, or some just didn't know how to manage it either when they were getting calls from producers. So we were helping with some of those initial questions, but we were also offering our media department to talk to them if they chose to do an interview, if they wanted to talk to the media, some things that they should keep in mind. So media, and then again, just as a refresher, the purpose of FAC for us was not only to offer services, but also to return personal effects and do the briefing. And then lastly, to also offer the site visit. So kind of like a one-stop shop for all of that. And then offer information, support, also to bring everyone together. I think for some, there was victims that were either injured, not injured, but they just wanted to be there. They wanted to have a sense of community, of support. And I think it also provided that. And then give them the right points of contact for the things that they might need in the future that at that moment that they might not be processing.
One last thing to consider for those who are hospitalized. You know, a lot of these injuries were horrific, and so many of the family members stayed with their loved ones and could not go to the FAC. So part of what that rapid deployment team, our victim specialists would basically bring all the information that was being provided at the FAC to the family members, to the victims who are still hospitalized. And that's something really important to consider when you are working with both deceased and injured families, as to how to make sure that that information is also being relayed over elsewhere.
And not all victims are comfortable going online and typing in, and the internet, you know, they're not very comfortable with it. So it can be also overwhelming. So offering alternatives. Back then, I don't think you know, there was like a website where they can go and click on just one link for all the services. So in the moment, in person, I think was the most appropriate. Lessons learned, obviously, always lessons learned, right? It was very stressful. It was chaotic. We were working 16-hour shifts for, I don't know, 2-3 weeks, and so it was a lot. So some of the lessons learned, as we were talking before this, was you know, maybe having something available online, which again, it's hard to do when you're responding and you have a lot going on, and a lot of it was done in person. So I think it worked out fine. My complaint was there was no food for the victim specialist, and I was telling Claire, you know, sometimes you don't think about yourself as you're responding, right? You're responding to a crisis. And things have changed for us internally, just our policy and being mindful of shorter shifts, rotation of our crisis responders, our rapid deployment team. So I think that that's something that we already have incorporated, but in that moment, we were working 16-hour shifts, we weren't eating, we didn't think about, you know, we didn't have time to go get lunch. So it was something that I think it's important to think about your own people, like how are they going to eat or have time to get food and take care of each other. Anything else, Claire, before we open it up for questions?
No, I think we did touched on everything. I think that was really important.
And then I don't know, Nidan, if you want to open it for questions right now.
Yes, so we do have one question. So I'll go on ahead. So Jenny asked, is it typical now that the FBI would cover costs? Are there parameters for determining who should pay, and what resources might be out there to help local jurisdictions recoup costs?
Do you want to answer that, Claire? I don't know exactly the reason. Well, I just, like I said earlier, San Bernardino County was still reeling from the bankruptcy, and so costs were an issue. And given the extent of services to be provided, especially with cleaning, the space for the briefings, the fact that it was our case, those were a lot of the factors that made it so that we were the ones to subsidize and pay for this and sponsor this entire FAC. For the most part, a lot of cases are opened up. You know, we're not the first responders, so it's usually the locals who respond, and it's the locals, the cities that do open up the FACs, and we may be there to support and be another spoke in that wheel. But typically, we're not the ones that will open up the FAC and, you know, pay for all the services that we discussed in this particular case. This was just a very unusual case, and it's not typical across the country with all the different MCIs that have occurred. I don't think I answered all those questions.
Yeah, and just, you know, as a law enforcement agency, I always say that because we're a law enforcement agency. The first question when something happens, like an incident, a big incident, we say, okay, is it a crime? Is it a crime? And are we the lead investigative agency? And then that will help figure out how much involvement we can have. Now, there are cases where we're not the lead investigative agency, and they just need additional support. And that's where we can use discretion on how much and how much we can get involved and how much support we can provide. But generally speaking, we're pretty open to offering support to other agencies as well.
Thank you so much. We appreciate both of your time. We appreciate you being on with us. Now, for the sake of time, we're going to jump into our next presentation. But I do understand one of you, I know one of you can't stay, but one of you will be able to stay for us till the end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually have to jump off. I have another engagement. I have to leave. But thank you so much again for allowing me to be able to present.
Yeah, thank you. And our contact info is there. So if you guys ever have any questions in the future, want to reach out, feel free to contact us.
All right. So if anyone out there has any questions that pop up in a few moments, I do believe Crystal will be staying on. So we are going to have an extended question and answer session at the end of the seminar. So if a burning question pops into your mind a little bit later, you can put that directly into the chat and we will get to those questions at the end. All right. With that, I want to thank our guests for joining us. I'd like to jump into our next presenter. We have Joe and Ane from the Mayor's Crisis Response Team.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello?
Yes, we can. We can hear you good.
Okay, sorry, I'm having some trouble. Well, good morning, and I just want to say to Claire and Crystal from the FBI, you made some key points, so thank you very much for your presentation. Also, thank you, Nadan, for spearheading this crucial fact training. The Mayor's Office of Public Safety is grateful to EMD's Operations and Training Division for granting the CRT the privilege to participate in this core capability seminar. So just allow us to introduce ourselves. My name is Joe Avalos from the Mayor's Office of Public Safety. I am the director of the Crisis Response Team. And alongside me this morning is Ane Vecchioni, our CRT Principal Program Manager. And again, we cannot overstate the significance of this training opportunity. And if those of you who know me, this is something that I've eagerly anticipated for quite some time. We can go to the next slide. So the Mayor's Crisis Response Team role out of fact. The Mayor's Crisis Response Team holds a significant role during a family assistance center. And as Ane and I will dive into shortly. Again, though, at this moment, I just really want to highlight our eagerness for a coordinated response with our invaluable partners from the city, DMH, FBI, Victim Services Division, or maybe the name has changed, so I'm sorry. CRT has, we have a proven track record of collaboration in challenging situations, such as our involvement during the Las Vegas mass casualty shooting, the Moore Park, and the Lunar New Year shootings. Crystal mentioned having a relationship with the county coroner's office. I can't emphasize the importance of this relationship. Thankfully, the crisis response team has a very close relationship with our LA County coroner's office. In fact, they do trainings often with our current CRT members and in our academy. So in our upcoming slides, we'll go into detail of CRT's roles and responsibilities. You can go to the next slide about Mayor's CRT. Thank you. The Mayor's Crisis Response Team has been dedicated to assisting survivors and victims for over 27 years. Our CRT comprises of 250 passionate volunteers who undergo a comprehensive 9-week training academy. They're kind of like police reserves, and they're really well trained. CRT plays a pivotal role in offering crucial emotional support to victims of traumatic incidents throughout the city of Los Angeles. We partner with our local first responders, and our members respond to incidents at the request of the Los Angeles Police and Fire Departments and County Hospital. And we provide immediate on-scene crisis intervention and serve as a vital liaison between victims, survivors, and emergency personnel while we're on scene. We offer referrals and support to victims and their families affected by death, violent crimes, or traumatic incidents. These incidents can range from homicides, officer-involved shootings, suicides, serious traffic collisions, natural deaths, and multi-casualty incidents. Furthermore, CRT's presence on scene has really helped de-escalate potential tension with law enforcement during the turmoil, and aftermath of a crisis scenario, contributing to really building trust with the city of Los Angeles and local government. Lastly, I'd just like to highlight our measurable accomplishments. CRT's journey has really evolved from being a peripheral department to becoming an essential strategic partnership with the Los Angeles and Police Fire Departments and the County Coroner's Office, including the City Attorney's Office and EMD. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what to expect? Under normal circumstances, CRT, we really pride ourselves on our rapid response, our rapid initial response time. Typically, anywhere throughout the city, we have an ETA of 30 minutes after receiving a call from DOC, which is our Department of Communications. However, I would say that it's important to note that our response time during a family assistance center may differ from our standard 30-minute procedure when deploying members to a large-scale incident like a FAC. And that is because we want to prioritize and assess the specific needs of the situation. As a result, we anticipate that CRT members may have a response time from that 30-minute up to 90 minutes in order to ensure that our team is adequately prepared and equipped to address the unique requirements of a FAC. And again, I just want to emphasize the flexibility and adaptability to meet the evolving needs of emergency situations, as fluid as we all know that these can be. CRT, has been involved in these situations, and we're good at, adaptability. You can go to the next slides. Trauma informed. So, as the director of the crisis response team, my primary role and responsibility is really to ensure the availability of trauma-informed safe spaces. I know the F.B.I. just mentions on that as well, for families affected by an incident or a crisis. Our paramount objective is to prevent re-traumatization and foster a sense of security for all individuals involved. We'll have a collaborative approach in achieving this goal. We collaborate closely with essential partners such as EMD, Los Angeles Police Department, and other stakeholders as well. And then we want to identify key areas. So together with our partners, we identify key areas within the Family Assistance Center that serve distinct purposes. So for families, we want to create create spaces that offer comfort, support, and most importantly, privacy to families coping with trauma, and LAPD security. So I'd work closely, as I do in my current role, with the Los Angeles Police Department, emergency operations, and their command staff, ensuring that there are secure zones for LAPD personnel to maintain order and safety. And again, going back to the media, as we experienced during the Lunar New Year incident, they were set right in front of and facing the reception desk, which really just created a problem. So we want to create and designate areas to manage the media so that their interactions are respectful and responsible. And I'd like to just emphasize the importance of that partnership in creating those safe spaces. So right now, Anae will provide further insights into the significance of the designated areas and the impact on the FAC. Anae, you can take the next slide.
Hi, thank you. So next slide, please. Thank you. CRT will serve as a companion navigator at the FAC, and this role is not therapy or counseling. It's a system to support victims and survivors, and it's a process to make the resources center more efficient on site. So CRT volunteers will be trained as companion navigators in advance of an event. They'll be supervised, assigned, and will assist during the response phase. They'll be flexible in assisting with practical needs. They're going to assess and match needs and resources and serve as a victim liaison and a conduit for information that can be disclosed to these families. The FAC can be an overwhelming experience for individuals. It's a new place with a lot of activity. So we want to ensure that the reception and intake area is safe, secure, quiet, and welcoming. The companion navigator role is going to help to provide a consistent and coordinated response to help centralize the flow of information for loved ones so that they may obtain mental health services and utilize resources effectively. The companion navigator role is going to continuously monitor events, reactions, and the needs of families and establish a process for receiving information that can be disclosed to the families. I want to highlight the importance of death notification assistance. And we know that the identification and death notification happens within those first 24 to 48 hours. CRT navigator will provide death notification assistance to the coroner and medical examiner, providing comfort and support to the family in this highly sensitive moment. Families deserve to receive death notifications with respect and dignity. So being mindful of their need for privacy, upon receiving the notification, holding space for these families, monitoring their crisis reactions, and facilitating their expressions of emotions. Also ensuring access to emergency medical care in those moments after that death notification is given. Also access to clergy, mental health, LA County DMH, if the victims are in extreme distress or have communicated that they have pre-existing issues. Next slide, please. So the intake area is the first point of contact in the FAC, and it's a place for that initial welcome table where the registration of victims and their families is going to take place. And CRT companion navigators are going to be there managing the intake forms and identifying, inputting that identifying information. We're going to assess those individual needs of survivors and ensure that they get their needs met while they're at the FAC. So really listening to these families as they arrive. What is it that they need? Because we all know there is not one individual needs assessment that will serve everyone at the FAC. And we want to make sure that we have cultural and language considerations in place. So that initial intake is individual crisis intervention, which CRT volunteers are trained to in that immediate short-term crisis intervention on scene. Wraparound services and creating that plan with the victims and survivors to navigate that resource center. So the goal is to put families at the center of the decision-making process with a team of professionals and resources to help guide and support them. And this will foster resilience and self-efficacy while they're at the FAC. Navigators will also coordinate with other navigators when there are specific resources at the center that require or have higher wait times. So it'll be depending on that. We'll stay with that family for the duration of the time at the FAC and attend to those physiological needs, just ensuring that the immediate needs of these families are met and using trauma-informed victim-centric language that really validates the victim's experience and avoids distressing them further, easing anxiety and anxiousness that may come up. Again, supporting that family, sitting with them while that coroner makes a death notification or a family member is given information on the location of their loved one, if they're seriously injured in the hospital, or if they're missing. In addition, as previously discussed, the release and disposition of personal effects can also be a deep concern for a family member. And then, compiling that collected information, organizing notes, and helping them plan next steps. So coordinating requests for services and facilitating the delivery of effective services, that's the goal. And then in the end, when that surviving victim or that family wants to leave the FAC, the companion navigator will safely walk them to their vehicle upon departure and making sure that they have as much privacy and advocate for them up until they leave the premises. Next slide, please. Thank you. So linkage to on-site resources. There's going to be so many resources in the resource center. Some of the services that will be provided, as mentioned before, is that individual crisis intervention. Survivors deserve timely and official factual information after a mass casualty incident or mass violence incident. So a lot of victim service providers will be present. All the companion navigators are trained to provide individual immediate on-scene crisis intervention, along with our partners at LA County DMH and NOVA's National Community Crisis Response Team who will also be available if needed to support surviving victims on scene. We'll also have an offering of group crisis intervention using the NOVA model again for groups, larger groups, which would be homogeneous groups that could be separated out by people that were injured directly, people that were present but not injured at the incident, families of survivors, and then community members. CRT and the CRT staff and selected MOPS personnel, Mayor's Office of Public Safety personnel, are going to be participating in some trainings with the National Organization for Victim Assistance Community Crisis Response Team training, and that will be happening in October. So we will be training everyone not only in FAC training for the Navigator role, but also in basic and advanced community crisis response team training. And that will be happening also in January 2024. In the first month. And then next slide, please. Thank you. So the victim service agencies and organizations at the FAC Center, this really allows victims streamlined access to multiple partner agencies and resources and information. We'll have at this resource center clinicians, credentialed mental health professionals, victim advocates, and crisis counselors who are all trauma informed. We'll also, of course, have victim advocates and CalVCB, crime victim compensation, legal aid, any questions that may come up about insurance, Social Security, disability, FEMA, and so on. As you know, the F.B.I. Victim Services Division with the victim specialist, California Highway Patrol, all the way down to, you know, behavioral and mental health programs with LA County DMH, and then also the REACH team, which is supports children exposed to gun violence here in Los Angeles, and that's through the Children's Institute. But they provide a lot of support and partner with CRT on scene now for certain divisions within our South Bureau, and have really proved to be a great resource for our children in the city of Los Angeles. And then cultural and faith-based organizations. Resources should be respectful and reflect the community's language and culture. So age appropriate, you know, disability needs, looking at developmental status, sexual orientation, our LGBTQ community. We want to involve trusted community members and agencies. For example, civic and faith leaders and educators that are really in touch with the community and have developed relationships. And then American Red Cross. So next slide, please. And, you know, we believe that the role of the companion navigator at an FAC is critical in supporting victims and their families, in preventing further re-traumatization, in building trust, and creating safe spaces. So we're looking forward to strengthening relationships with our partners, making sure we have the capacity to serve when an event does occur. And our partnerships are key in providing comprehensive services to survivors of mass casualty incidents and mass violence incidents. So I want to go back to now our CRT director, Joe Avalos.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't have anything to add. You pretty much nailed it. So thank you for your part of the presentation. We can move on to that.
Okay, I just want to issue another thank you to Joe and Ane. Thank you so much for being here. We are going to move into our next presenters. I believe we have Jean from LA County.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, we can hear you great.
Okay, great. I also would like to introduce my colleague, Mariela Balam. She's also on the line and will be co-presenting in this. So thank you for having us here. As you know, Mariela and I have been very involved lately in a lot of mass violence and mass fatality event planning. But of course, our plan dates back to 2010 when we adopted our first Family Assistance Center plan, worked with the City of Los Angeles and lots of partners, including NTSB and the F.B.I.'s office, Deborah Deem, who's been already spoken about today, who helped us quite a bit in forming this plan and kind of creating the framework for how we move on. And we do have some pretty significant updates on what we've been doing on the program lately. So this is what we want to talk about, the overall framework, and then some of the things that we've identified recently as areas of improvement or that need some improvement, which, you know, nobody likes to do, but it's always time to do it. So Nadan, if you could advance. And this is what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to hit the activation and set up pretty briefly. I think that the city plan and our plan have a lot to do with, you know, how this framework is going to work. But really what we found out, you know, as we move forward is that the activation, the setup, the briefings, some issues on operational coordination that we want to highlight. We're going to talk about the service delivery and also where our head is now, which is really moving us into the recovery mode. So you can go ahead and click through. So I say this a lot, and I'm saying this again, because one of the things we want to be very clear about is what the mission of a family assistance center is in the context of Los Angeles County. It is for information and services, and there is a tendency to try to make this model work for lots of things, and it serves us all well if we keep remembering what it is that we're there to do and what information we're here to provide. You can go ahead. Our objectives, establishing the status of victims as missing, transported to hospital, or deceased. That is one of the best practices that we picked up as we moved along and decided how we were going to support, how we were going to look at this Family Assistance Center operation and where we can stay focused. And it really does help. And I think some of the comments that have made so far, people that are missing is a huge law enforcement component. If there's a big, especially no manifest or, an open-ended event where you don't actually know who was involved or who was in the area and who might have been affected, there's a huge law enforcement investigation component there. Transported to hospital is going to be a lot having to do with our relationship with our EMS, the MAC. Sorry, I lost the name, but for our EMS division. And then deceased, of course, is working with the Office of Medical Examiner. So this is what we're looking to do. And of course, our mission statement is to provide those services in a compassionate, effective, and comprehensive manner. Go ahead. So improving efficiency, getting everyone involved and engaged in improving this plan and making sure that we have a plan that works is really important. And I need to change this. We're no longer the coroner's department. We're now the Department of Medical Examiner. But there's a huge reason for the coroner or the medical examiner to be involved and law enforcement to be involved in order to really streamline those systems. One of the things that came up early in the discussions was not having to put the families of victims or bystanders into multiple interviews to tease out information when we can have one way to intake the information, and that is shared by both law enforcement and medical examiner's office. And one of the things that you'll see in our plan is a set of forms that was really intended to synthesize and put together, coordinate the information that they need in order to identify missing persons. Fire services, obviously, just for on scene. And then, of course, we want to be able to deliver human and social services and mental health services effectively and efficiently. Go ahead. One of the things that was discussed to a great degree was when are we going to activate a family assistance center? And it's really important to know, first of all, that it's not always necessary. You could accomplish the goals of family assistance center in a much smaller footprint with just a few participants in a small event. The family assistance center is really to work on larger, more coordinated events. And really importantly, and as you can tell from the city plan, it is where the incident has occurred. So in the recent events, it's going to be in San Bernardino, it's going to be in Monterey Park, it's going to be in Half Moon Bay, it's going to be where the incident occurred. And that jurisdiction is ultimately responsible for establishing it and actually even wanting to establish that type of a service delivery model. We will require all sorts of agency coordination from all levels of government. So this is federal, state, local, this is everyone. And we need to build that into our plans right away. This isn't something where somebody can say, I own all of this territory and I can just make every decision. There's a lot of information and there's a lot of agencies that have purview. And that's one of the things we want to make sure that we're all aware of as we walk in. The need to cooperate and collaborate is strong. Certain county personnel will always be responding to a disaster in Los Angeles County. That's just the nature of the human services that we offer. We are a service delivery organization. Department of Mental Health, Department of Public Social Services, among many others, are the ones that will apply and will respond to any disaster. That even extends to things like foster care and adult protective services. Our tentacles are deep in some communities. And also, really, we're looking at this as a way to streamline and provide that coordination between all the agencies that really do need to coordinate. If you're looking for missing persons, you really do have to work with the medical examiner and EMS to be able to identify people in the system. And there's all sorts of points at which this coordination is happening on an operational level on a daily basis, up to and including, and this is not in the presentation, but I'll say up to and including the Department of Health Services actually worked on a family information center, which is kind of like a family assistance center, but at a hospital. So many of our county hospitals also have the understanding of what we're trying to do, how we're trying to identify, and what type of services we're trying to layer in to residents that were impacted by these horrible events. Go ahead. So now we want to talk just a little bit about the Lunar New Year MCI, and Mariela we'll go back and forth on these because Mariela and I were both there. But more to the point, I'm not really looking at the event as the event, but we're really looking at this as a way to improve our planning. And we went through a pretty rigorous evaluation of how our plan worked in concept, and wondered some of the things that we would need to work on and improve, and observations that we really just, and some of them I noticed listening to Claire and to Crystal. Definitely I heard the resonance of some of those observations. So one of the things I do want to say is, by the time Monday night, all of the deceased had been identified, and all of the next of kin had been notified at that point. And that's really an important trigger when we say, do we need a family assistance center? How's this going to work? And assistive services were offered to a multitude of people. Some were the families of the deceased, some were the injured, some witnesses referred to offices. And now then we also are at the point where a community resilience center just opened in 2023. And I'm so happy that we have Nina Locke on to talk about that, because that is an absolutely critical piece as we move forward in this. Mariela, did you have anything to add on that one?
No, we're good on that.
Okay, let's move ahead. So these are some of the things that we extrapolated from the response from the agencies. As it turns out, Mariela will talk a little bit about the other initiatives that we have underway. But some of the things that we teased out of the working group that was going on was, what did we learn? How can we improve our activation and our way that we proceed on supporting a family assistance center? And remembering too that, this wasn't a county operation, we were in a support model. So one of the things is, you can't have enough people to run the operation. And that is, I think, can't be understated. If this devolves into 2 or 3 people, or even 1 to 2, you're not going to get everything taken care of. There's too many balls in the air. There are too many areas to be monitoring and to watch. We need to make sure that when this happens, that a good coordinated team comes in to operate the Family Assistance Center. And that has nothing to do with the event that triggered the Family Assistance Center. It has everything to do with the site itself and the services that are offered, and coordinating the services that will be there or could be there. The other, excuse me, turned off all the phones but one. So the other issue that we are looking at is, partner agencies are going to receive multiple notifications. So we have a notification protocol. And when we asked, hey, how did everybody hear? Did this work? We found out that people were actually notified 2 and 3 times in some cases, that who they got the call from was not the same as we had written out in our nice, neat little plan. And as we started to look at the improvements that need to be made to our plan, one of the things we decided is multiple notifications are better than none. We would rather that your organization get several notifications so that you understand what's going on, and then you can join into the operations team to find out how you're going to respond, or how you should respond, and whether or not you should deploy. So the notification protocol was really important, but I think it's really important to see it as flexible and fungible. The word will get out. Word gets out in many different ways, and there's a lot of networks of information out there, and all we can really do is kind of absorb those networks into our operations and assume that that's going to happen. What partners, oh, no, not quite yet. This is actually kind of a big one. How are you going to address, and I think Crystal talked about this a little bit, which is people will show up and do show up. And it almost takes a full-time person standing at the door saying, thank you very much for your offer. but this isn't the place for you. And I think Deborah Deem did that for San Bernardino, and she shared a lot of that with us at the time when we talked to her afterwards. And it's really a hard issue. It's a tough issue because it's political, and it's people who really sincerely want to help. And how you manage those, how you channel that is really very difficult. How are you going to decide who gets in the room and who doesn't get in the room? And I'll be really honest. I mean, I felt that there were opportunities we missed to usher people into the room, and other people were there and we didn't know why in Monterey Park, or I'm sorry, in the Lunar New Year event. And that was actually a pretty small event. I mean, in terms of complexity, it wasn't so much. So I would say, as you look at your plans, as you're figuring this out, you need somebody to figure out who can be in the room, who should be in the room. When we looked at Pulse Nightclub, we were struck at how some services were what I called before the curtain, and some were behind the curtain. So there were things that required privacy and things that did not require privacy. There were commercial businesses that were in there offering services. How are you going to negotiate all of that? How are you going to have the hotels set up? And some of the agencies, in particular, the district attorney's office, is very, very well set up for understanding all of the pieces. But in a big event, there needs to be some support, and they need to be able to have that resource in order to use it. So there's a whole lot there that we'll talk about it, but needs to really be discussed in great detail. And then the process for managing donations and volunteers. We had people come up and offer hotel rooms for family, hotel rooms for people who were directly impacted. We had offers of food, we had offers of goods, we had services, money, everything was coming into that. And, you know, fortunately, Monterey Park was able to come up with a plan to be able to do that. But I'll tell you, at one point, I mean, they had to hire a contractor for some pieces of this. And it's really important to take the donations and volunteer part of it and really have a clear understanding of how you're going to leverage in, especially when you see the value. And we had a couple of them where the value was just so clear, but it was really tough to decide, how do you manage it? And do you manage it at the center, or do you have a whole other team that's working on donations and volunteers? Mariel, anything there? And then we'll move in.
No, the only thing that I do want to add is, like Jean mentioned, we did a deep assessment of our plans, and from that we are walking away with different initiatives that we're trying to put together. One of our colleagues, Matthew Tapusian, has worked intensely in putting together procedures for our watch center / duty officers to have a uniform response whenever these incidents do happen to occur again. So we now have written procedures that we're finalizing so that we have that uniform response. Secondly, we are assessing our fact plan and trying to incorporate these lessons learned that Jean mentioned to improve the fact plan as it stands. Also, we had already previously to the Lunar New Year incident, we had been working for about a year in developing that long-term incident, because as we all know, once the fact is gone, the needs don't go away. So we wanted to make sure that we had something to provide the support needed for these victims in the long-term recovery aspect of it. So now what we're currently working on is, how do we tie all these initiatives together and making them a unified component as we start working with these tools that we're developing.
And we fully anticipate that the product that we end up with, you can go to the next slide, the product that we end up with is going to be far more extensive and comprehensive than our existing fact plan. It's going to include the notification, hazard overviews, and the mid and long-term recovery plan. So we're excited about it. I mean, there's a lot of good work going on, and it's always a pleasure to work with the people who are so passionate about this. So moving right along, this is just kind of setting up the continuum of, how we looked at it. We really evaluated our plan based on how it was written. When after the event, we sat down and really ripped it apart and said, how did we meet all of the benchmarks that were in our plan? And what are the core pieces of that? So getting that activation and set up, all the logistical bits that has to do with making sure you have a good facility and that you know how to use it and you know what resources to request. For each of these, I'm not going to give the example I have, but believe me when I tell you, there's an example in my head for each one of these where we can improve. Briefings and public information. that's a function that really does need to happen at this center. Operational coordination, just getting everybody in the room doesn't necessarily mean that magic is emanating. You really do have to work on who can share information, what agencies are allowed to share with other agencies, and what is the process of doing that. And I always famously say, don't share that with me. OEM doesn't provide a service, so I don't need to know any kind of information that would compromise somebody's personal information. So operational coordination, though, means I recognize the need for the other folks to do so. And we need to make sure that this is a site where our agencies are working together in a really productive way. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I forget who said, I think it was John who mentioned something about, getting some policies set up. And this is definitely an area where policy setting, agency by agency, is really important. Service delivery, again, I honestly, that's probably the best part of, our agencies really do know how to deliver the service, and just making sure that we have the proper ones in there that are able to be delivered. And then transition to recovery. And I just as an example, the Lunar New Year Center was up for a week. It was up Monday through Friday. We closed up on Friday, but on Monday afternoon, we were already meeting to discuss the transition. So we were already talking about how are we going to make these resources available to the people who don't show up, to the people that just couldn't take it in because it was too soon and they weren't emotionally able to absorb the information. And then we worked with the city, and the city put up an amazing resource and worked with the nonprofits to make sure that there was resource out there that was easily findable. So transition to recovery, even though it's a little bit out of the bounds of our current fact plan, will definitely is a huge part of our next move. Go ahead, next.
So when we're talking about city lead, it's really ultimately the city's decision to activate a fact. And like Jean mentioned earlier, not all events require a fact, but we want to make sure that if you do request to activate a fact, or you decide to activate a fact, that you take into consideration the need for activating the fact and have clear goals and objectives when doing so. It's also the city's responsibility to maintain that command and control with identifying, especially those crucial positions like the fact director and PIO functions. Identifying a location is very important as well. We do have to say with Lunar New Year, City of Monterey Park provided their community center, which was a great space to have hosted that fact at that moment. But it is important to understand the needs of having the appropriate location when you decide as a city to activate a fact, and the needs that will come in regards to coordinating that fact. And if that is the case, our office is also available to provide with either technical support or even requesting Jean, myself, and other team members as support staff for the fact if that's something that is needed. Jean, is there something you want to add to this slide?
No, it's just, I mean, this is kind of more for inside. It's really directed a little bit more to the city folks, but this is a time where also documentation is really important. All of this stuff you need a place to record all of this and to make sure that you have a clear plan of action and that you have buy-off. So a lot of the forms that you'll find in our plan, really, we have an assessment plan. Actually, Matt Tapuzian really improved our assessments and our forms so that we really do keep track of what information we're collecting, who's telling us to do what, and so we can kind of make order out of the whole thing. So this is just kind of some of the basic activation stuff. Go ahead.
So when you decide to activate a fact, I know that our partners from the F.B.I. mentioned that it took about a few days before the actual fact was established for the San Bernardino event. We do want to have something established. During the 2020 Bobcat, we had to establish a local assistance center. And at that time, given all the COVID protocols, I had to figure out how to establish a local assistance center that met the needs fitting the public health mandates at the time. And to be honest, we established what we called point of contact fact, where I contact certain county departments to have established point of contact to ensure that whoever needed those services was contacting a live person directly and not going or being funneled through different channels. As we saw the need to increase the footprint of that local assistance center, we moved to a virtual, more big scope option until it was finally decided that we needed to conceive a full physical LAC, and how are we going to achieve that given the COVID protocols. And we're taking those lessons learned from establishing that local assistance center in multiple phases to incorporate them as to how we think about a fact. Because like you guys mentioned, sometimes if we have a complex coordinated attack, we might not be able to immediately set up a fact as needed. Information for the need for people to try to understand what's going on and where to get valid, vetted information is going to be there immediate. So considering establishing whether it's hotlines or web pages, activating 211, 311 in the city's case, those are the things that we want to start looking at, so that we're not prolonging the need for services and information. Like I mentioned earlier, finding the appropriate location. And when I said location, we start looking at making sure that it is accessible to everybody, making sure that it has ample parking and breakout rooms. I can't emphasize the need for multiple breakout rooms. I know that some of these locations at times are challenging and hard to find, because space is always a huge commodity that is not always available, but also partnering sometimes with hotels or other large facilities that could provide that type of support would be an important thing to start considering now and start developing those MOUs or those relationships. Creating a staff plan, and like I mentioned earlier, there's certain positions that we want to make sure that are there from the beginning. And like Jean mentioned, this is not a one or two people assignment. We want to make sure that certain positions are filled at all times and that communication is flowing amongst these determined positions. And that goes back to determining the assignments, who's going to be responsible for what. Because from managing local assistance centers and facts, I could tell you that there's a lot of moving pieces, whether it's in the logistics of the activation of the fact or the information. So understanding what assignments and who's going to have those assignments is crucial to ensuring the success of the operation. And providing training. This usually is just on-time training, because as we know, we have a turnover of staff at all times where people are going to be showing to these activations for the first time. So providing that on-time training and having that scripted out is important beforehand, so that you know that information that you want to share immediately. And obtaining resources, and whether that's also for the physical location, something as simple as partitions could be crucial in the final outcomes of that. And of course, the services that our agencies and partner agencies are going to provide. Next slide. So I know that we've talked about planning for all needs, language, very highly important. I know that we try to have within the county a lot of our documentation translated beforehand, but a lot of that information is not necessarily applicable, because it's more services before the incident happens or delivery of information that is very specific to that information. So having those documents or even people available to ensure that they're speaking the languages needed to meet the needs of all families of the victims impacted. Taking into consideration all the abilities that people may come in with, or disabilities per se. So understand that not all of these physical or disabilities are visible at all times. So keeping aware as to what the needs would be for people. And I know that the crisis response team mentioned of that empathy, ensuring that we have that empathy when addressing the needs and walking individuals to all these services that they might be entitled or will be receiving. Also, I know that the F.B.I. mentioned childcare, being aware that people are going to show with children and seniors, and maybe ensuring that the information that may be provided is important to all these families, but not appropriate. So making sure that we have safe spaces for people to have the space to leave their children, or to have somebody accompany somebody else to ensure that they have the appropriate support when receiving all the information that is going to be delivered, and ensuring that they have the appropriate crisis response per se at that moment in that time. Next slide.
So
That
so
was-
this is yeah, so these were some of the things or some of the principles that underlie what we have been talking about. One is starting small. We did have mental health people on the ground for the Lunar New Year event pretty darn quickly. And fortunately, that works in our favor, because when we did get around to opening the center, or when the center did open, those same personnel came back, and they had already met and had contact, and they already had things moving a little bit. So starting small is not a big deal, and we should assume that that's the way it's going to be, that it's going to start at the incident site, and we're going to start pulling people away. Also, the other thing, and the mayor's crisis response team also mentioned this, crisis counseling, that working the line, that having somebody available. It doesn't have to, and from the county perspective, that's not entirely Department of Mental Health, right? There's other agencies that are qualified and we should use in bringing that sympathy, that empathy, and that understanding to families as they come in and they get that individualized kind of concierge level liaison, family liaison, that we're looking for. Local assets. It's really easy to look at our plans and just go, then we're going to require, request this huge resource. Use the local resources. I think, Nina Locke is going to be talking in a bit, talk about an amazing local resource. And that was something that was just so valuable to the Lunar New Year incident. So we have to know who they are and who's in that area. You're going to get a lot better response from people when it's in their neighborhood and it's their community. And so we always try to encourage people to use local if you can get local. Be flexible. Again, I keep telling people, like, our plan looks great, but when you try to put it into play, there's a lot of moving that you have to do, and a lot of opportunities that maybe present that weren't there before. I know in the case for us, we had a new county department. We had 2 new county departments that really have come up since we wrote the plan, and we didn't really understand how to use them too well. So we had to learn how to use it on the fly, and then bring them in and really use the resources that they offered. So being flexible, using Go Kits. We do have them for local assistance centers, and we basically use the same thing for the Family Assistance Center. Having sign-in sheets ready to go, having, just basic supplies ready to go, tablecloths ready to go, all the simple stuff, including signage. And signage is a big one. Signage really helps to know where the event is, how people can get in there, even when it's a local it's a local setting. You will need to have signage so that you can direct people in safe ways into the property, and maybe even as a distraction, right? Put the signage here and then make the door over there. And then direct public to the information. So you're going to have information that's going on in the center, but public information is kind of a whole nother animal that is going outside. So figure out what your hotline numbers are, what websites you're going to use, get that up and moving as fast as you can. Make sure that you're ready to go. We're very fortunate now in the county. We have a page that we can just flip a switch and have it ready to go with all sorts of information. And we had that on, we had our finger hovering on that. But if you have that and you understand how to direct people right away, that'll buy you that time as you're figuring out how to set up, what you want to set up, where you want to set up, and who's going to be involved. And then not the least is plant resource requests. Now, City of Los Angeles is obviously a pretty big organization, but most cities in the county are not, and most cities in general are not. And the resources that you may need are going to be all over the place. It's going to be, well, actually, if you go to the next slide, technical assistance, that's one thing. Bringing in the people who really know something or can back you up. Somebody who's had experience at this. Staff resources. We often find that in family assistance centers, and I'm going to just presume this to be true for the family assistance centers, the people who've had the experience of helping in a way that they really made a difference tend to want to come back when you have another operation. So, making sure that we have the deep staff resources. And if you don't, then who has them that you can request them for? And I want to steer you, especially for smaller cities. We do have a lot of resources in the county, and I would suggest that at that point, if you need to staff some of these branches, that just ask. I mean, don't fuss around and not staff it. If you need it, you need it, and bring it in. Plans for references. There's a lot of other plans. There's a lot of pieces like the donations and volunteer management, for example. Have your plan in your book, in your Go Kit. Have your other plans in your Go Kit. Understand what your notification process is going to be. As we said, we have a hazard overview now that has just recently been prepared. It's not approved yet, so don't ask for it quite yet, but it's definitely on its way to approval. All of those things, you need to have those with you if you're going to be at the Family Assistance Center, and you need to be able to navigate what we have. And that includes the protocols of people like the FBI and the DA's office, and all of those things. You need to have all of that material, or at least you need to be familiar with it so you know how to leverage it in. Training materials, we developed a whole static set of training materials where we can bring people on and pretty quickly give them the do's and don'ts of coming on, having to do with privacy, having to do with media, all sorts of information, and even reporting back to their home office, because how people report to their home office could have an implication for privacy. And do they need to know back at the office versus what's going on, and how are you going to report that to the EOC? At some point you have to, the EOC needs that information, but you need to make sure that you understand how that's going. Signage, accessibility assessments, bring in people to do that. And then also the service providers. What service providers do you need? So I think I'll just put it out there. We could have done better in Lunar New Year, and some of this we could have requested a few more resources to make it a little easier and to coordinate a little bit better. And certainly that's why we're kind of going over this right now with you, because we wanted to make sure you saw that this is a rolling plan. This is never going to be finished and dusted and put on the shelf. I think it's really an evolving plan. And the next slide, it's the same as, you can go ahead and click to it and done. But this is very similar to the city's plan. I don't think we need to sit here and look at this too much. It's just the idea of, how this would all look out, how we've sketched it out. This is available to anybody who wants it, but this is how we looked at it. And we should, we should have representatives in the operations team to at least represent all the branches or all the sections. So we can flip on from this. All right, I'm going to handle this next slide because this was quite a journey. Just don't even try this if you don't have a PIO team. I mean, honestly, the need and the voraciousness of the media and requests for information, not even just the media, but it was just almost too much to handle. And there are people who are trained to do this. Probably, I'm looking at the list, probably people on this call. You really shouldn't be working on this. If you're part of the operations team, you have to decide, are you on communications or are you on the assistant side or the operations side? And once you know that, then work with the communications people and figure out how you're going to work it. And I think Crystal mentioned, the one entrance and, how did you lock it down? And I will tell you that you can't overemphasize the importance of the PIO team. You really shouldn't be worrying about the media if you're trying to run this center. They should be fed and happy by your comms team. They need things in language, they need interviews, and they're constantly asking for more and more information, and they're finding information for other places. I think in Lunar New Year, I think everybody saw this. I mean, one of the gentlemen who stopped the shooter, he was interviewed everywhere. We eventually made it to the assistance center, but the first I heard of him, he was on the news, and I was watching an interview because they found him, and that's fine. It didn't have anything to do with me running that center, but clearly he could have used some help, and we could have provided, or the PIO team could have been helping to manage that situation a little bit better and make sure that the media didn't deter people from visiting the center and getting the assistance that they needed. The second part about that PIO team is just assume that you're going to get VIP visits and come up with a way to funnel them somewhere else or to stop them from interfering with operations. This is nothing new to us in family local assistance centers. And Mariela and I will tell you, we have so many VIPs that show up at these centers when there's a big disaster. And typically we'll split up and take them away and do this. This team was too big. The VIPs were too big and too present to be able to just push them off in a corner and say, you know, this is what's going on. You do need to build the VIP visit in there. They have a right and a need to visit, and you kind of want them to understand what's going on, because you might need legislation and financing and all sorts of support, and the legislators are very important for that. But on the other hand, you can't have it interrupting and stopping operations. So if you did nothing else but have a really good operations team and a really good PIO team, you'd be doing well. Okay, moving along, and it looks like, yeah, I'm in good time. Nadon, if you want to advance that. Again, this is just having to do with staying connected. One of the worst things is like you're in the assistance center and you don't even know what's going on outside. So that communication's big back and forth with the EOC or with field reps for situational awareness is really important. And again, working with the PIO team, and also the safe spaces for a work environment. We actually had people like, I'm not going out to lunch. There's too many people out there. And is this an environment that works for clients and for the people that are working the center? And I was struck, Crystal, when you said, you know, we didn't get any food. We had a tremendous amount of food. The Red Cross did an outstanding response, but we didn't have a separate place. And so not having those areas separated made a big difference. So maintaining safe spaces, making sure we have a good work environment, and that we're staying in communication with what's going on. Next. I think we've gone over some of this, and I'm going to actually, Mariela, I know that you had some comments on this one.
I just wanted to emphasize the importance of that daily briefing to make sure that you're connecting the communication from the other structures that are supporting the incident, like the command post or the EOC, ensuring that that communication is flowing back into the fact, because it will impact your operation, and ensuring that staff understand what's being decided on the outside and how it impacts. So this supports the overall decision making that is happening at the fact as well. So keeping that communication flow is very crucial for the overall success of the communication and then the long-term planning when the fact is gone.
Yeah, we did briefings at the beginning and at the end every single day. And it was one of the smarter things we did, and we really, really enforced it. And also we got improvements in the workflow, because we got a lot of feedback from the people that were providing service that said, hey, can we do it this way instead? And that was massive. And we got to make those adjustments every day, twice a day. We had an opportunity to make an adjustment in how the operation was working. Going ahead. Service providers, this is just really important. And we have the service providers that we're used to working with in a local assistance center and in our disaster roles. But then we also have people like Nina, who will be talking for Chinatown Services. We hadn't engaged with them in working a disaster before. So the assumptions that we make in working with our voluntary organizations active in disasters, they don't know that. They're not clued into that. And we have a language that we think that they understand, but they don't. And in a family assistance center, when we're looking at the goal, which is community recovery, community healing, long-term commitment to recovery, we need to bring those service providers in and integrate them better into our operation so that we can get to know each other and really have that transition out. So this is I think a little bit of an area we're going to be exploring more. Certainly we have talked about it a lot in the initiative that Mariela's been heading up. But I just wanted to bring your attention to it. This isn't a bring out the usual suspects. We'll be working with community members who we don't work with a lot on a day-to-day basis. And we're going to have to be able to handle that. Vetting needed services. There were things that came up that you'll need to bring in. But then there are people who just want to be there because from the goodness of their soul, they want to respond to this disaster and they feel that they have something really valuable to offer. And finding out a way to negotiate that is really a big deal. And then the training, making sure that the service providers know what's going on in this center, what are we trying to accomplish, and what is appropriate I don't want to say behavior, but you know what I mean. Conduct is probably a better word for that. Moving along. This is another just slide. I guess I've been making this point a little. Now that I look at the slides, you know, you think, wow, I was very intent on making a certain point. And the point is that when we bring all these stakeholders in, one of the operations challenges is managing the people that are in the room. And we have to have a transparent criteria for who we let in the room and who we push and say, you know what, we'll put your information on the website, or we'll take your flyer and put it on a table. And I say this because, you know, we are government agencies, or at least I'm speaking on behalf of a government agency, and we can't favor one or the other because I like so-and-so or I met them at a conference. We need to actually have criteria that gives us the ability to say, thank you so much for showing up. And I really do understand what you have and what you're doing, but you just don't fit into this operation, or you do fit in. Could you please come in and take a seat? And by the way, can you make sure that somebody's here consistently for the next week? So there's some ways to do that, but you need to walk in pretty clear, because you get hit up with this probably every 25 minutes. There's something that has to be done in this area. And then the process for deconflicting missions, you know, there's a lot of people that are there for compassionate care and relief and assistance and long-term and midterm and short-term. And there's multiple agencies that have money or services or goods to offer. And it can be unclear what the process ought to be, what the workflow needs to be. And so we have realized in many cases that we have to bring a group together and just talk about, what is your mission? What do you need to do to get your work done? And how do we organize this a little bit better so that everybody gets what they need, and that doesn't show that the clients are getting what they need, even though you can offer that, maybe they should offer it instead, or you come second or something like that. But this is really big policy, really big deal. And it includes respecting the policies and the limitations of agencies. We get one a lot that in assistance centers that has to do with photographs. There are agencies that are not allowed to speak to the media, and they are not allowed to have their photograph taken. And it's just their policy. That is how they have to conduct live. So we have to make sure that that doesn't happen and that they're in that safe environment. And that's not always evident. So it happens a lot with our state agencies. But nonetheless, just wanted to make that point there. And then Mariela, you want to talk about this?
Well, in regards to service delivery, I think that we're looking to have a uniform process and flow. And like Jean mentioned, at those briefings that were happening at the Lunar New Year FACT, were fundamental to determine how to better improve that flow, provide the services, and also that personal protective information. We want to make sure that if you're not necessarily in need of it, we're not collecting it, but we do understand that we have the role of ensuring that there's a flow and a process for this information of our sharing of information to occur. So we want to make sure that we understand that we help and facilitate and ensure that agencies are able to ensure information amongst other, if and whenever appropriate.
And the PPI was one that had come up in the past, but you know, we lock those down a lot more than we used to. Okay, moving along. All right, and this I'm gonna let Mariela take the lead on this, and I'll jump in if necessary, but I think you've got it.
Thanks. So one of the things that was very fundamentally helpful when the Lunar New Year occurred, as I mentioned earlier, our office had already been working on developing a long-term recovery plan for these type of incidents. We had been very fortunate at that time that nothing had happened up to that point directly within our county, and that work that we had put into developing this plan was so fundamental when the Lunar New Year happened, primarily because we had worked with each other, the partners that were going to be responding to the FACT. So that morning, I had multiple calls from partners that had supported the development of this plan come to or contact me and say, hey, how do we support, how to respond? And I said, stand by, let's figure this out. We'll figure that out. So that if anything, like we all hear during all of our planning, It's know your partners beforehand. So that definitely helped transitioning into the FACT activation and now into that recovery phase of what happens after the FACT goes away. And we understood that the FACT, given the time frame that we were going to be standing it up for, was not going to be there for everybody for whatever reason not showing up to the FACT, because as many of you, if for those of you that responded or supported, it was quite an intense FACT, and I think that part of it was the media that just was hounding at the door for the most part. So we needed to figure out how to work with the media and ensure that they didn't deter people from coming into the FACT. So knowing that, we wanted to make sure that we started looking as to what the long-term recovery would look like in that aspect in regards to donations and the distribution of donations. Fortunately, Chinatown Service Center was a crucial partner in establishing that that support immediately and taking on board that long-term recovery response and maintaining it. And like Jean mentioned earlier, they just recently opened the CRC, the Crisis Response Center, not crisis,
Community
Response Center, to ensure that we have this ongoing support for the community as needed. So I'm very grateful for them in that aspect, and ensuring that these services are also provided in language, and very aware of the community cultural needs, the language needs, and that has been fundamental. Also, at this point, we're realizing, as a crisis response team mentioned earlier, we're looking now into that long-term mental health recovery and how is that going to be provided, and how that support is going to be ongoing in that aspect. Next slide. So the local assistance formally opened on Monday. We started a lot of the work of that, establishing that center on Sunday, but formally opened up on Monday. But like Jean mentioned, Tuesday, we were having that conversation as to, okay, we're only here Monday to Friday technically, on the eyes of the community, but how are we going to continue providing these supports ongoing beyond Monday? So that we started working with the city to establish their city webpage, distribution of information, flyers, making those connections with those agencies that we're going to continue the mission of providing those recovery resources after the FACT closed. So maintaining that information and transitioning into that phase is very fundamental in starting that conversation as early as possible, to minimize any surprises and ensure that we have the ample time and resources to ensure that these resources continue in the appropriate manner. Jean, do you have anything?
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, it's just the most important thing here is that, you know, that we oftentimes in a plan go, yeah, then we demobilization and everybody goes home. That is not what can be done in this type of center. It has to be transitioned. It can't just be the center might go away, but the functions need to have a safe place to continue, and residents need to know where to keep going, and agencies that come in. I mean, I think one of the things here that we talked about before is, you know, new opportunities came up. You know, at the beginning, nobody thought to offer such and such a service, but then a few weeks later, you know, there's an offer to, you know, I don't know, do housing or whatever. I mean, it doesn't really matter. The point of it is that the agencies that are going to be doing the case management in the long term, they need to know you need to know them, and they need to know each other. And that is, I think that the demobilization for this type of center is actually so important. And it really, you really can't understate how important it is to make sure that people just don't disappear into the ether. And then that you can move on from there, Nadan, because that takes us into what's going on there and the stuff that we're working on that Mariela is leading.
So as I mentioned, we're working on further developing that long-term recovery plan and ensuring that we have the foundations needed. We were able to develop a strong structure. Now we just want to refortify that structure and ensuring that we have all the partners and appropriate supports needed. So that's one of the phases in the long-term recovery that we're trying to support. And And the overall goal, I think, as for the county, as we start to develop our tools, is connecting all these tools, because they were developed individually and separately, and we want to make sure that we're connecting them together, and that even though these plans you could pull each piece separately, we want to make sure that they're cohesive if need to be put together. So that's what in the long term for what our county is planning and looking to do. Also, the other thing that was very clear to us that we really need to connect is our donations management, that especially the financial piece of it. And we want to make sure that we have clear policies as to how to support that concept if whenever needed, and to ensure that whatever the assets that may be collected be distributed in an equitable manner. Jean, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for having us to be able to talk about this. Again, you can see our comments are really focused on the operation of the Family Assistance Center, but also like how it connects to all the other services, how the county plans to respond, and where we're looking to improve our policies and improve our procedures and our networks to improve the overall flow of this type of event. So thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you guys being on. I do see that there are some questions. We are going to save those to the end for the sake of time. So we'll address all the questions that have popped up. We will get to all those at the end of the presentation. But for now, I'd like to pass it over to Justin Pierce from LAWA.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Just want to do a quick mic check if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Great. So again, thanks everyone for inviting me on this morning. For the next couple of minutes, I'm going to talk about family assistance in the aviation community, specifically looking at our airports, which is LAX and Van Nuys General Aviation Airport. Next slide. In the aviation community, when we talk about family assistance, there are really two paths that we can go down. Those are legislative emergency incidents and unlegislative emergency incidents, and I'll explain the difference between the two. Next slide. For unlegislative incidents, these are incidents that would occur at or near one of our properties, which again would be LAX, Van Nuys, or even our facilities up in Palmdale, that do not involve an aircraft. That could be an adverse weather incident, structural collapse, bomb incidents, complex coordinated attacks, earthquakes, anything but an aircraft incident. In these situations, family assistance services, such as establishing a FAC, would fall within the scope of the LA County Operational Area Plan. I think this is where further conversations would be helpful, because we are a little bit fuzzy on exactly how these processes would work, and more specifically, what resources or services would the city and county need specifically from the airport for an unlegislative incident near or at one of our properties. Next slide. So now let's talk about legislative incidents. These are very, very tightly governed by the Aviation Disaster Family Assistance Act, which pertains to the National Transportation Safety Board, U.S. air carriers, and foreign air carriers as well. Next slide. The criteria for these are that these are aircraft incidents involving a domestic air carrier holding a certificate of public conveyance and necessity issued by the U.S. Department of Transportation, or a foreign air carrier with an economic authority issued by the U.S. Department of Transportation that results in the loss of life. And in these situations, NTSB serves as the lead investigative agency. Next slide. So what does this mean when it comes to setting up a family assistance center or general family assistance center services? Well, it means that the air carrier has fundamental responsibilities to the victims and their families affected by an aviation disaster. The air carrier is the primary responsible party for family notifications and all aspects of victim and family logistical support. This could include providing a copy of the passenger manifest, publishing a toll-free phone number for those who believed a family member or friend was on the flight, communicating with the media, securing a facility at the departure, arrival, and connecting airports for family members and friends who may be gathering. This is pretty important to note here. So if a flight was coming in or out of LAX, maybe the aircraft accident did not even happen on US soil. Perhaps it happened over the Pacific Ocean or somewhere across the country. That still could mean that a family assistance center would have to be established at LAX to support those family members who were local to the airport's destination or arrival city. And lastly, the air carrier is responsible for securing a facility to be used as a family assistance center. And I'll point this one out that, specifically at LAX, that's where we see a lot of the largest challenges because we do not have a dedicated facility that really meets all the different requirements for a fact that we can offer our air carriers. They are required to identify a location and to submit that for the FAA for approval. However, I do see there potentially being some challenges in standing one up, particularly for those smaller air carriers that don't have the bandwidth or the resources like the larger ones do. Next slide. So in terms of the Los Angeles World Airports, we really serve in a support role for legislative incidents involving an aircraft. We provide direct assistance in the support of aircraft rescue and firefighting services. We would establish a security perimeter and evidence preservation at the scene location, assuming it's on our property. We are responsible for and would close runways or taxiway closures if the accident is on the airfield. We would provide bus transportation services to move passengers and flight crews to reception sites. And I'll talk a little about more of those in a second here. We'd also would assist in establishing those reception sites. We have the ability to provide initial care packages for passengers and crew members that are impacted. And we also have capabilities to provide wayfinding and translation services. Next slide. So during a aviation incident, there are various types of reception sites that could be or needed to be stood up at the direction of Incident Command or Unified Command. Each of those has a very specific purpose with a different entity that is responsible for those by legal statute, depending upon whether or not it's a legislative or unlegislative incident. For example, a passenger gathering area, which is a facility where uninjured survivors of the aircraft disaster can be taken to for secondary triage, additional guidance or support. That is responsibility of LAWA, and we do have designated locations on our footprints to serve in that capacity. In addition to that, there are areas specifically that need to be set up for crew members to gather and be interviewed by the FBI and those airline partners. And the air carrier is responsible for setting up a crew gathering area. We also have potentially the need for a friends and relatives center. Again, this is a facility where family members and friends who believe their loved ones were potentially involved in the accident can go to get initial information and the status of our response actions. Again, that is the responsible party. The air carriers are responsible for standing up and serving and providing services at that center. Then we have the Family Assistance Center, which we've been talking about this morning. Again, those are two different paths. If it is a aircraft incident, by law, the air carrier has responsibility for establishing and operating a FAC with support from obviously the traditional agencies who would respond in this case, such as the American Red Cross and others. And then we have a reunification center, which is where family members, which was where it could be done in a facility or done virtually to reconnect those survivors with their loved ones. And that, again, for legislative incident is the responsible party responsible for the air carriers, and for an unlegislative incident that would fall under LA County's FAC plan. And I'm just curious just to see, now that the city is kind of standing up this capability, what that means in terms of who would take the lead in coordination, and then again, what specific services or resources that you would need from the airport. Next slide. In terms of our resources that we would be available to bring to the fights, we have a number of them. We have a mobile command post. We have a mass casualty incident trailer. We have 2 American Red Cross trailers on site at LAX. We own and operate 34 buses that we can use to help transport passengers or crew members. We have the buses. The challenge would potentially be the drivers, depending upon the time of day or the number of hours that they were working, because they do time out after specific times. We do have plenty of individual care packages that we can deliver on short notice for at least initial care items that we can offer survivors of any sort of aviation incident. We do have 2 plum cases for mobile broadband width for any areas that lack access to the internet, or for areas on our airfield in which cellular data is limited. We have changeable message signs and mobile light towers for night operations. Next slide. We do have a few sites that could be used for a reception facility, such as a family assistance center. Those options are the Flight Path Museum. We do own the Proud Bird Conference Center, which we could use. We have a airport police community room that's rather small, but it is a space we could use and stand up pretty quickly in the event of an emergency. We have a bus bridge lounge that we can use for multiple things, but that's the primary location where we would move folks to set up a passenger gathering area. And we also have an HR training room that can, with restrooms and 1 small break room that could accommodate up to 50 people, that we could use to provide for any of these facilities that are necessary. We have plenty of tents, tables, and chairs, and pop-up tents, message boards. We also have portable generators should we lose power in this situation and need to provide backup power to any of these sites. We also have some staff we could commit to the logistical setup of these spaces, or admin support, basic intake, and we could provide security at these sites through our airport police department. We do have the ability, we do have a print shop in place to, if we needed to quickly set up signage, and we have already pre-printed signage for Family Assistance Center that we keep in our storage rooms. Again, to help bridge that gap between the 48 hours in which the air carriers are responsible for setting up a family assistance center. Next slide. So applying considerations and assumptions, we do maintain a family assistance support plan. It was last updated in 2018. It's in desperate need of an update, and that will be something that we're looking at updating within the next 12 to 18 months. As I kind of mentioned before, air carriers, particularly the smaller ones, and international ones as well, we anticipate they would be seeking our assistance in setting up a FAC until their go teams can arrive on scene. Some air carriers just have a few local personnel who are operating out of LAX, and so those are the ones who we would anticipate needing the most help for. Our resources would be exhausted very quickly, so we would be immediately turning to the city and the county for assistance, depending upon the size and scope of the incident. And again, we have very limited facilities that we could offer to use as a FAC or other reception sites other than the ones that I mentioned above. And so that's a key concern to mine, particularly if it was a large scale incident involving 2 aircraft, or more than a couple hundred passengers. The facility options are very limited at that point of facilities that we control and manage and can offer. So with that, that's kind of covers it in a nutshell. That's my contact information. I think we're holding questions to the end. And so I will turn it back over.
Thank you, Justin. We really appreciate you coming out. Thank you for being here. We are saving questions till the end. I want to be sure that we can get to our last 2 speakers of the day, and then we'll open it up for questions and we can jump into anything people are worrying. I do see a couple questions in there, and we will answer those at the end of the seminar. But for now, I'd like to pass it on to Barbara, if you're on, with the American Red Cross, which
Hey
should
there,
answer one of the
Nadia.
questions. Hey,
Yeah.
Barbara.
Hey, and thank you for having us. And so, yes, for those that may not know me, my name is Barbara Mariscal. I am the Senior Disaster Program Manager with the American Red Cross here in the LA region. And we'll go into the next slide, which will cover pretty much an overview of how we as an agency support the leading agencies when it comes to a family assistance center. And so I do want to emphasize that the Red Cross, when it comes to family assistance center, we are a supplement to your plans, and how we can be of support through our resources. And so, as you have seen from the city and the county, and even just right now through LAWA, we do provide those shelter trailers. There's different ways that we can be of support. And so really, if you are having an incident where you are needing Red Cross to respond, and be of support and start identifying any needs for the clients, we always ask that you please call our disaster dispatch number, which is right there on the screen, because one of the first steps we may do is send out one of our government liaisons or a disaster action team to begin gathering information. And usually they're also the teams that will bring out the main start of the canteening supplies. So if we know, and this is what we've learned with, the Monterey Park incident, we made sure our teams brought out as much waters, snacks, and started, putting in that request through our senior leadership of we need to start getting a full mobilization of a canteen to support where the clients are being evacuated to during these incidents. And so this will allow us to understand the development. We will send them out either to your incident command post if you have one established, or your EOC as well. We just want to make sure we're there and can help address the immediate needs of the clients needing that support. Now, when we start transitioning from that initial stages of the response and now working more in coordination with our partners and understanding more of the ask of how Red Cross can be of support as the family assistance centers are being established, the main areas we would come in to support are through our individual disaster client services, as well as our mass care components. And so under the individual disaster client service, what does that mean? That means we have volunteer licensed mental health workers, health services workers, which are nurses, as well as spiritual care volunteers that are chaplains. These are usually some of the first folks we would deploy out, again, to supplement the resources that exist in the Family Assistance Center. They will work in conjunction with, if we have the Department of Mental Health and Health Services, just to initially just ensure that there's those extra shoulders for the clients to lean and speak to. And the great thing about these individual disaster care volunteers, majority of them do make up what we call our integrated care condolence team. This team only gets activated when we have incidents where we do see mass casualty events. such as Monterey Park, the Maui incident, as well as any fatalities that may occur due to home fires or other disasters. These are trained volunteers that will deploy out, work in coordination with the agencies at the Family Assistance Center, because they're the ones authorized to provide bereavement financial support. And so the bereavement financial support will go to the next of kin once we are provided or shared with the leading agencies who are those next of kin from those that have passed in these incidents. We will ensure the family has some financial means to go towards the funeral cost, as well as any ongoing mental health cost needs that they need. We will provide support if they have anything out of pocket. And so this team will be working very closely with the lead agencies. We will have them on site, because one thing we have learned in a lot of these situations where we've had to be part of family assistance centers, communication's key. And so having those private rooms, this is something we did a lot during Monterey Park. We were in those private rooms with the other lead agencies to discuss, what additional roadblocks some clients are facing, some concerns that are being raised, or are there other avenues we can look to provide additional support, things of that sort. So we ensure that we're taking care and addressing all needs necessary. And so this is part of our teams you will see on the ground, as well as in the next slide, we'll cover our mass care team. And it's not the mass care sheltering team you are thinking. Nadan, if you can move to the next slide. Essentially what we would do is to help ensure we are addressing immediate needs, means also the food and water, which we heard earlier. So we have to take care of ourselves. We have to take care of the clients coming into these centers. We as the organization can be of support there. We do have teams that are trained to identify local partners or restaurants in the area, ensuring we're addressing dietary needs. If it's religious or other health dietary needs, we're ensuring we're having constant snacks and hydration options available for the clients as well as our partners there. We provide 3 meals. This is something at Monterey Park we did. We provided breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's available to all there, from the residents coming in and to the partners working there. We ensure that we're providing everyone just that essential item you need to keep going through the day. As well as we'll have sometimes our shelter workers present, because they can help once inside the facility, the Family Assistance Center. They can help guide any of the clients that are coming in seeking services after they check in, help guide them towards the next place they need to meet, or if our shelter workers are working in conjunction with the mental health workers from the agencies there to keep an eye for these clients to come in, if they can redirect them. That's how we would help have our shelter workers shift from doing so much the mass care sheltering that we're so used to seeing in evacuation, but more of just that guidance and that just human nature touch of just helping these clients understand they don't need to feel lost and alone when they're trying to navigate the resources, and they'll be there just as that support to them. And so really, we're providing these supplemental resources to our lead agencies where they're available. This is part of it. What we do also, and we have recently seen more of these requests, is talking with our partners as they update their plans of how Red Cross can be of support, and including them in our MOUs that we are establishing with some of our partners. Independent cities are asking, updating their family assistance plans, but understanding what Red Cross does and how we can be a support to them. And so we will take the lead of the leading agencies. We will discuss, how we can be of support, what are the specifics, and really at that point, we just want to make sure we can just supplement and support all of your plans. And I believe on the next slide, it has my contact information. And so if there are any questions, we'll answer that towards the end. But I did want to make sure I covered that as brief, but as clear as possible for all here, since I know we are limited on time. Thanks, Nadan.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I really appreciate you and the Red Cross coming in and presenting today. So I would like to bring it home with Nina, our final speaker for today, who's going to go a little bit into just kind of the human side and really working with individuals. So Nina, if you're able to.
Yes, I'm here. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. And I understand we're running short on time. So I'm just going to move forward and skip some of the more like basic background about CSC. But pretty much we're a healthcare organization and a social human service organization. And I'm just going to go straight into our response to the Lunar New Year incident. So with our longstanding history of providing service to the city and the community, Chinatown Service Center was contacted by various offices and organizations that morning on whether we could provide service. So the morning of January 21st, I, alongside with many other licensed provider, two licensed provider and a case manager, arrived at the Family Assistance Center. As the community-based organization, our goal is really to be there to support where service is needed based on what our organization is known for. So in this case, it was like translation service, where most of our staff was also a therapist with a background either in social work or a marriage and family therapist. When we arrived, the city, the county, the sheriff department, FBI, they were all there, they were all ready. And we were assigned to a table and we were pretty much manning that table until coverage were met. And we were just covering for what we were asked to coverage for. And we stayed until operations and communications were aligned, and we, for that particular event, we didn't stay the whole evening or the whole day. Actually, we stayed until we were needed and returned when we were asked to return too for that week. And resources in the Asian community, particularly the Asian population, is pretty limited. We're very diverse, as you all know. We're not monolithic, and therefore, one organization is difficult to cover because of the diverse Asian population there is, especially in LA County. We're not very centralized in just one area. We're actually throughout LA County. So providing service as CSC has provided service for the community for over 50 years. We work with many other organizations in the community, and we make connections. Aside from this incident, even by practice, many of our API organization, nonprofit organization, we refer to each other, knowing what each organization's areas of specialties are in. So when this situation happened, we were contacting each other. We were like, okay, which organizations are out there where we could provide support to each other. And it so happened that Chinatown Service Center was the organization that were out there that morning of, and we were all just on standby. We were on standby supporting the city and the county and all the organized governmental organization that were out at the Family Assistance Center. But there were also a team of API organization that were also on standby in case there were other language needs that were needed. So, moving forward, we continue our effort working with governmental agency and other local nonprofit organization. And we're happy to state, we're in the road to recovery. We're already in this transition period, and the Residency Center is now formed. And this Residency Center is formed to help the community heal from the Lunar New Year incident. The center is funded by the Anti-Terrorism and Emergency Assistance Program. It's actually a federal funding. Along this whole time with working with the governmental agency, we were also provided guidance and support from consultants from the Office for Victims of Crime. The consultants were also very experienced, and they have also provided many support and guidance in other mass violence that occur throughout other parts of the country. And unfortunately, of course, in recent years, there's more than ever in terms of mass violence. So we're very lucky this whole process, and we're very fortunate to be able to work alongside with all these governmental agency and nonprofit organization. the as mentioned earlier, the Monterey Park Hope Residency Center was finally open in August, about 2 to 3 weeks ago. And the September is actually our first full month in operation. We're not even there yet. We're not even done with the whole month of September, but we're in operation now. And the center core services, such as individual therapy and support group, are provided by credentialed providers, and those services will be there. It's being provided by not by just Chinatown Service Center, but other nonprofit organization that has partnered together with this effort to help the community heal. There's other like Hero Christian, that is also a federally health qualified clinic. There's Tsuji, which is a faith-based emergency response organization. And we have SSG Silver, which is a local nonprofit organization serving API. They've also been in the community for a length of time. They partner with Department of Mental Health, so but known specifically for serving the API population. So at the Residency Center, as the core services are provided, but due to a stigma of receiving therapeutic service, it's not always very highly sought for. We do have individuals that are receptive to this, but there continues to be a large population that are having difficulty to understand the correlation between therapeutic service and a traumatic experience. Like, how does therapy actually help when they've experienced such traumatic experience in life? Whether they're directly or indirectly affected, many are still uncertain and unaware about these knowledge and information. So with the Residency Center, we're creating many healing activities on top of the individual therapy and support group that we have. And these healing activities encompass is not just the activities of its own, but also educational. We'll provide like a very short, easy to understand educational piece to orient the community and learning like coping skills and therapeutic healing skills, so that they can use along as we as a community together try to heal from this Lunar New Year tragic incident. So I know my information is not there, but I could leave that in the chat box if you all are interested in wanting to learn more about the Residency Center. It's Monterey Park Hope, and all of the services are provided in language, but of course it's also provided in English too. If services are facilitated by an English facilitator, we will have language, we will have translation for those services. So I'll provide more of my contact information and information of the Residency Center in the chat box in a bit. But thank you for having me here, and look forward to continue to work with you all.
Thank you so much, Nina. We really appreciate everything that you've done, everything that your organization does, continues to do. And we really thank you for being here today. I just want to thank everyone who came out, all the participants, and especially I want to thank all of our panelists, Crystal and Claire from FBI, the FBI's Victim Service Program, Joseph and May from the Mayor's Crisis Response Team, John Brown from EMD, Jean and Mariella from LA County, Justin from LAWA, Barbara Mariscal from Red Cross, and of course Nina. We've reached the end of our program. I believe there was only one question that I saw that was left unanswered. So I did want to just kind of throw this out to all the panelists. The one question we have here, which is, you mentioned the EOC. Have you seen the need for EOC activation concurrently during the activation of a FAC? For smaller jurisdictions, this is an important consideration because of issues of staffing both. So I'm just kind of throwing that out to the panelists, if anybody has any thoughts or answers on that.
Yeah, I think that came up during my presentation. Yeah, I mean, to answer the question, I mean, you have to have a way to get information in and out. There has to be a formalized way, and it does have implications. And I think if you talk to the staff at Monterey Park, they'll tell you that that was a tough operation for them, the Emergency Operations Center piece. In many cases, in our case, we never activated the county EOC. We were there in a support function anyway, but the city did activate. And yeah, it's a big problem in a small city when you can't wear 3 hats at one time. And we certainly saw that happening. For us, in LA County, what we would do is not necessarily need to have the full-on EOC activation, but we do have a 24/7 duty officer. And that's what we would rely on. So we would use our watch center, and I know we referred to the efforts that our colleague Matt Tapuzian has just put in, coming up with a policy for the watch center and our duty officer to show how that relationship is going to go informationally, how it's going to go back and forth. That's what we would rely on. I think every organization has to come up with what that would look like for their situation.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Jane. Anybody else have any other thoughts? Any other panelists? All right. Well, I want to thank everyone who participated today. Again, especially a huge thank you to all of our panelists, but also to everyone else who was here, who attended. We thank you so much for being here for this crucial seminar. This was recorded. It will be posted to the EMD's YouTube page. So we'll have that available. If anybody missed it or wasn't able to, they will be able to get the video. With that, we're going to end the seminar. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate all of you for coming out.